Guide, and we are picking up on question number 13, and we're on section 11 of chapter 37. And the feature that's characteristic of all organisms above producers is that they're all consumers, meaning that they have to eat other things to get their energy. Can you see from this graphic right here, what is the percentage of energy loss at every level? Remember this from the game? We had to be real specific about it? Yeah. 10. Only 10% of the energy flows up to the next level. The rest is either used up by the animal in this level, as your heart beats and your blood flows and your ATP are working inside. They require energy, so some of the energy is used up. It doesn't mean that a full 90% is lost in the environment. Some of it is just going to be used up by the organism itself. But overall, if he gets eaten by the mouse, that grasshopper, only 10% of its energy is now inside of the mouse. And so at every level, you lose 10%. So you should know how to read a chart like that. And that was question number 15. Explain the cumulative loss of energy with each transfer in a food chain. It's 10%. You can see by the numbers you drop a zero every time. And then number 14, we'll see this in another picture. On the next page. But what would happen in an ecosystem if all decomposers were removed? There are two decomposers, bacteria and fungus. They're in the soil. We'll see it in another picture on the next page or so. And when things die, they are on the ground and they decompose with bacteria and also with fungus in the soil. So all those large molecules that they're made up of, they are broken down into small building blocks, and then the producers use it again for the next growth. So what would happen if you took away the decomposers? Whatever they make in the decomposition is not available. So this is nutrients. It is vital components for the plants to do their thing. So what's going to happen to plants if the decomposers don't do their job? Yep, they're not going to be able to grow. Producers, if you take away the pedestal right here to this food pyramid, the whole thing falls over. If plants die, then animals die. Isn't that what they theorized happened to the dinosaurs? They believe that a giant asteroid slammed into the earth somewhere around the Gulf of Mexico, and it created a tidal wave that washed over all of America, all the way over to New York. So they have remnants of soil that belonged in the Gulf that now is found over there. And it created a bunch of destruction from earthquakes, but also from all that dust from the impact went up in the atmosphere, clouding the strength of the sun for photosynthetic plants. The plants died, and then animals died. So not only did the dinosaurs die, but it was a mass extinction. And only certain animals were able to make it through that period. And then you had evolution with so many open niches, then a lot of animals then went in and it had a new flurry of life. It's an explosion of new species and stuff. So if plants don't make it, then everything that is a consumer on the plants and the whole food chain falls apart. So moving on to the next question. 16. What's the relationship between a food chain and a food web? They put the food chains in different colors. So you can see that plants can get eaten by this grasshopper. The grasshopper can get eaten by the red-tailed hawk, or by the western diamondback, and the western diamondback could also eat other types of, like, looks like a mouse. It's a kangaroo rat, like in it, or maybe even a squirrel or a chipmunk. So when you see intertwining, like a spider web, when you have food chains being all connected, then it becomes a food web. So if you follow the producer to the primary consumer, to the secondary consumer, to the tertiary consumer, that is one food chain. But then these ants could also get eaten by this woodpecker. And the woodpecker, it's kind of a top carnivore, but when he dies, he goes into the soil, and then you have the recycling of the nutrients back in the soil for producers. Okay, we're on 17. Now take a look at the picture in section 11 in your textbook. You're going to see this species name. You know that it's a starfish, but it's got an italicized name right here. It's called Pisaster, and that's the name of the genus of this starfish. Starfish eat mussels, which look like clams, and they cement themselves to rocks, to the bottom sides of piers. And it's really interesting how these starfish work. When you take marine biology, you'll go into detail on it, but they don't have true muscles. And they don't have a circulatory system that's with blood. They have a water vascular system. And if you know anything about hydraulics, that's what's used to lift a car off of the ground in an automobile mechanic's garage. So water is used by these starfish to grab a hold of things and then apply a force, ever so slightly, but over long periods of time. You could take the strongest person here on campus, and we could give them a pretty normal amount of weight, like this textbook here. We could ask them to hold that out like that, and you could only do it for so long, and then your muscles are going to tire, and then you're just not going to be able to do it anymore. So what this guy does is he applies a small amount of force over a long period of time, and those muscles, if you try to pull them apart with your hands, you can't. But the starfish can open it. He grabs a hold of it and then slowly pulls it apart over like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and that thing will open up just a little bit like that. And the starfish has a retractable stomach. He'll take his stomach, take it out of his body, and stick it inside of the clam and digest the clam from inside the clam itself. And then when he's done, he'll pull his stomach back out. So these guys are voracious carnivores. And if you take them out of the environment, the muscles are going to grow out of control. So that's what this chart is right here. So with this starfish, he's going to eat a lot of these mussels, and that means that there's going to be a lot of other species that can be present with them. If you take this starfish out of the picture, the mussels take over. They eat all the algae. They outcompete all the other species, and there's only a few species, one or two species, the mussel and maybe one more. So this concept is called keystone. The word keystone, it represents the main stone that is in an archway. In ancient times, when they would just pile bricks on top of each other, they could make an archway like a door. And that last one that goes at the top is called the keystone. It's a wedge. If you take that out, it all comes tumbling down. If you take the keystone species out of an environment, the entire ecosystem or the food web can be drastically affected. So that is what they're talking about here with this starfish. So there are examples of a keystone species in almost every ecosystem. If you take out wolves, for example, like they did in Yellowstone in the 80s, then it had a drastic effect on almost every animal that lives in that big, huge park. Because they end up controlling each other. They set the balance. Without that real important one species that has such a ripple effect on all the others, then it really makes a difference. So after they discovered, they took the wolves out because the wolves will go into people's ranches and kill their cattle now and then. So they got all up in arms like, we got to get rid of wolves. Well, they did, but then it caused so many other ecological problems. So they reintroduced the wolves, and now things are back in better balance. So let's answer some questions about this now. 17. If you remove a keystone species from a community, will have an effect only if the species removed is a predator. Likely reduce species richness, have no effect at all. Most likely increase a lot of species richness. Now by species richness, that means that there's a lot of different species. So we just showed in this chart right here that if you take the keystone species out, boom, your number of species present, the species richness goes down. So that's the answer right there. It was letter B. How many years did it take for the number of species to drop after they removed the starfish? Here's the start. Every line is a year, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. You went from 17 species down to 2. Pretty drastic. If you have completed your Succession virtual lab, you can do this chart without even looking in the book. That virtual lab is about primary succession and secondary succession. So I'm moving over here to chapter 12 in the textbook. And if you are highlighting it, which is a good thing to do, when you start with a lifeless area with no soil, it's called primary succession. Primary means that it occurs for the first time. Primary succession, at the end of it, it will produce soil from solidified lava. So the example in the book here is when you have a new island that is born out of the sea from lava that cools. It is hard rock. What's the first thing that will come in and grab a hold of lava and use the sun to make sugar with photosynthesis? Anybody run the game yet? All right, I won't spoil it then. So the description, primary succession, is right there on the screen. What's an example? Primary succession is when there was no life at all, like on a brand new island in the ocean. Secondary succession. I'm going to highlight in the textbook. We see this all the time, especially in Southern California. Boy, we sure have some wildfires the last 2 years. Some of the largest in California history have been the last 2 years. So a fire comes and burns everything down to the ground. But there's soil there, so it doesn't have to go through primary production to make soil. Secondary succession is going to disturb it. It could be a flood, a tornado, a fire. It clears everything away except it leaves the soil intact, so things come back quickly. A wildfire swept through parts of Yosemite National Park in the summer of 2013. I remember that. Yosemite is my favorite national park. If you haven't been there, it's truly amazing with these huge waterfalls, great hiking trails. You can hike up these really steep cliffs. They have Half Dome there that people climb freestyle. Just amazing. People do a lot of ropes there too. It's just an outdoor, amazing wilderness area. So a fire came and burned down about half of the place. It was pretty sad because it had all these tall, mature trees. But as sad as a fire is, it does have a way of resetting nature, because you need to have disturbances sometimes to bring it back into balance. So that's definitely a secondary succession, because it's got the soil still there and it bounces right back. A grocery store goes out of business. The building and parking lot are now empty for 15 years. You're going to start to see cracks in the cement or in the asphalt. And after several years, the entire place can be covered with plants. That's an example of secondary succession. Moving on to section 13 in the book. Question number 22 is highlighted in my textbook right there. It's not hard to figure out what an invasive species is. To invade means that the enemy has come in, they don't belong there, and they come in and conquer. They invade like a Viking warrior. So the definition is it's a species that spreads beyond its original point. Usually people bring it in willingly, not knowing that it will create an ecological disturbance. Many times people don't even know that they're carrying these organisms with them. A big way that they move from place to place is with boats. When they take their boat from one lake to another, they might even check their boat. They don't see any weeds or any clams or anything that's attached onto the bottom of the boat, the trailer. But if they leave their bilge water in there, bilge is a lower part of the boat. Boats usually leak a little bit, maybe in through the engine or something, and the water's at the bottom of the boat, underneath the floorboards. So they have a motor that can pump that water out. Well, if people are moving their boat, they're supposed to bring their boat empty of bilge water and check everything, because even the smallest piece of an algae can get into a lake and completely take over the primary production and crowd everything out. Just like you start with the starfish, you can have species richness in the lake. When this thing takes over, now there's very few species that can be there. When plants and animals have had a chance to live together over hundreds or thousands of years through all these generations, they keep each other in check. There's a good predator-prey relationship there, and they've evolved together. But now if you bring in something that has different DNA, it can take a little bit less sunlight, more of this, less of that, where others can't compete. Now this one can grow and crowd over and stop the others from getting sunlight, compete in a way that there's no check to it. So they come in and have a field day. So that's an invasive species. There's a website where America keeps track of this. Even around the world, they know what shouldn't be there, and they try their best to get them eradicated, but many times you can't get them back out. So it's pretty sad. Another example is house cats did not belong over in Hawaii. When they brought them over there, the species richness of all the wildlife and birds was drastically reduced by over 50%. Cats are amazing hunters, and they came in and they nearly wiped out so many. They did make many bird species go extinct. That's another example of invasive species. Time and time again. Your textbook has a really cool picture right here. This python, it grows to be 16 feet long. Someone brought it in to Florida, and they either got tired of having it. When they get too big, they don't know how to handle it, so they throw them out in the wild. And it is an invasive species that had a field day. These pythons right here, they can eat small deer that are taking a drink out of the water, and they'll grab it and eat it. We saw in the Serengeti how the python ate the baboon. So even some people can die from this too, but it's pretty rare. So we answered 22, and we also answered 23. You're staying at a campsite that is a lake for boating, and a large sign says, make sure you drain your bilge water on land and wash your boat with beach solution. What are they concerned about? An invasive species that is inside the boat, on the boat or on the trailer. So as you can tell, I'm skipping through the textbook pretty fast, but if you want to really solidify what these concepts are, spend some time with the textbook. If you take shortcuts on this, then you're not going to be all that prepared for the test. So don't be surprised if you get a C if you're not doing more than dropping an answer on a question on the reading guide. So make sure you're understanding it and can explain it. We'll do a little bit more here. Which of the following converts inorganic compounds of the ecosystem into organic compounds? We're going to spend some time talking about organic and inorganic. Can you hear the word organism in organic? So that means that it is a molecule that belongs in a living organism. And we'll spend some time talking about this. You know them. Carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. They're made out of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, and phosphorus. That's organic. But then everything else really is inorganic. You could find it in the soil. And we need some of these minerals. Vitamins and minerals are inorganic. And so there's a cycle of getting the inorganic stuff from the environment into living organisms that need it as well. So that's what this is talking about right here. Number one in this section of 14 to 23. I think you know the answer. Which of the following converts inorganic components of the ecosystem into organic substances? And that would be producers can do that, and in some cases, decomposers. So decomposers are bacteria, and sometimes they can disassemble organisms and put them in the soil. Sometimes they can reassemble stuff and then they put it in the atmosphere. But the best answer is producers, letter A. So question number 2, I think you can answer that. What is meant by the following phrase? All organisms borrow chemicals from the earth. So how about you? You're made up of molecules. Where did the atoms come from that you're made up of? You can't really say that they came from your mom. Where'd they come from for your mom and from your dad? They came from the food that they ate. They came from the air that they breathed. So we'll learn about the mitochondria and how it takes the carbon dioxide and I should say the oxygen and other gases, and sometimes we can take gases and make them into solids. But we're only borrowing it, so when we die, we'll decompose and we'll go back into the earth as well in one way or another. And over here in section 14, I highlighted this first paragraph, and that's the answer for number 3. The 2 processes that help to sustain and drive ecosystems are, they're in bold, energy flow and chemical cycling. The flow of energy and the flow of chemicals. There's a major theme in biology that defines whether or not something is alive, and that is obtaining and using energy. So this whole biology theme of energy and matter is what we're talking about. For this unit, I'm going over the reading guide. Not the easiest way to take notes. You might be used to PowerPoints. We'll do that sometimes. Sometimes you'll take your own notes in different styles. But why we're using the reading guide is because it's always available to you in the textbook. Sometimes I'll assign it like I am here, but if I don't assign it, use the reading guide to help you go through the textbook. Go through the textbook. It's not very long. You can get the textbook on your phone. That app that you can download, the Pearson Plus app, it's on your iPad. You can also put it on your phone. So make sure you're scanning the pages, looking at the key terms. In a couple minutes, I'm going to show you the tools that you have to help you study with your textbook. So here's a picture of that energy flow and chemical flow. I think you've seen this. Maybe you even had one yourself. It's a terrarium. It's a closed ecosystem. It's got a plant in there. It's got soil where decomposers of bacteria are. It's got water encased in there. And plants and animals give off gases that each of us need, and so they cycle it back and forth. All energy comes from the sun. So look, here's the energy flow. Energy comes into the system, and plants use that energy to make photosynthesis. And then we're into chemical cycling. So the chemicals get made into sugar, and then the snail eats the plant. The plant and the snail die and go into the soil, and then the decomposers disassemble them, make the raw ingredients available to the plant again, as long as you have energy coming in. Energy is also lost as heat. So that's the concept right there. This is a small little container on your table, but if you look at the biosphere, that's one big closed ecosystem of the Earth. Next page, 15. And I'll highlight this key term right there. You can see that key terms are really important. If you don't know what net primary productivity and you're reading that question, you're lost right there at the very beginning. And then you look at the answer choices, biomass, so you don't know what that is. And so vocabulary is really important. If you don't know that, then you struggle. Like if I was going into a French class and I didn't practice my French definitions, I would be really in trouble. So there's a word called gross and net. Gross means the original amount of something. Maybe it's a salary. That's your gross salary. Then you take out taxes and you take out health insurance and you take out saving for retirement. And then you have at the end of the paycheck the net amount after everything else is spent. So that's the same thing right here. When you see the word net, that means after everything else has happened. So the remainder is what's left. Primary production has a gross amount of energy that they produce, but then the plant uses some of that energy that it made, and then it can pass off the extra and put it into a fruit, or it can put it into a new leaf growth. And so then you have net primary productivity. So what is best explained? What's the right answer for that? A, B, C, or D? The fact that you have to account for energy expended by the plant to move water by the leaves. The fact that plants perform photosynthesis only during the day. No. The amount of biomass removed for the plant's own cellular respiration. How much energy the plant loses due to inefficiencies. Net primary production represents the stored chemical energy available to consumers. So which one is it? A is a true statement. B is not a true statement. The amount of biomass removed for the plant's own cellular respiration. That's a true statement for net primary productivity. But if you look over here, it is the amount of new organic material added to an ecosystem after it's done everything. So the question is a little ambiguous, because net primary productivity is explained by the fact that you have to account for the energy, and then what's left over goes on, and the amount of biomass removed for the plant's own cellular, yes, and then what's left goes on. So A and C are the best answer. I would not have a question like that on the test because it doesn't have a true right answer. Can you read this diagram right here? You can look at the long bars and the short bars. So the only way you can understand a chart is to look at the X and the Y axes. Net primary productivity. So the longer the bar, the higher the number, the more they're giving to the next generation. Next trophic level. Tropical rainforest. Yeah, a lot of plants. The tundra. The open ocean, deserts, very small amount of biomass that can be eaten for the next generation. So which one, true or false? Desert and semi-desert shrubs have the lowest average net primary productivity. Yep, they're very small. True. Okay, I want to wrap this up, and you'll do some of this on your own. Get to one of the harder questions. I skipped up to section 17 in the textbook. This is an interesting picture. We've seen it before, but what if you put yourself in the food chain? You're a secondary or tertiary consumer. So if you are a vegetarian, you are an herbivore. You're a primary consumer. And look, all this corn can support all these people. Remember, 10% of the energy gets passed on to the next generation. So if you become a carnivore and a meat eater, then you go to another level, and 10% of the energy then is your new level. So when you look at this, now for a meat eater, you are having to have a lot of cows that you're going to eat over like a given annual amount. Not that you're eating all these cows, but cows aren't grown individually, they're grown in mass. And so what about all the water that it took to feed them? All the fertilizer, all the food. It takes all this food to feed all these cattle just to feed one person. So the higher up you go, the more energy it is and the more inefficient it is. On top of that, when we talk about pollution, when you have pollution in the environment, the pollution gets more concentrated the higher up you go. So if you eat low on the food chain, there's less pollution that you're going to get inside your own tissues. But now the cows are going to accumulate the pollution, and then when you eat it, you get it even more concentrated in you. There are certain plants, certain animals, fish or farmed animals, chickens and things, that can be more polluted when they're in a high concentrated farm. So we'll talk about the business of food coming up here in a couple of months, and we'll come back to that topic. You got the answer for 6, right? 10%? Do you see these diagrams right down here? This is a main part. I'll show you what the pictures look like. There are 3 inorganic elements that you have to know the cycle for. This first one is the carbon cycle. I'll do this one with you, and then I'll have you do the other 2. So, number 1, explain how carbon goes from the atmosphere. So right up here, you're going to write CO2. Carbon is in what we exhale. All animals exhale carbon. So you are going to have carbon get there from industrial, from animals, expelling carbon dioxide in the air that we exhale. CO2 is up in the air. Carbon is one of the main ingredients for the molecules that are in living things. So now we have to account for how does it get back into organisms. Number 1, photosynthesis. So you have plants grabbing carbon dioxide in the process of photosynthesis, and they're going to strip the carbon out of that gas and put it into a solid to make sugar. Have you heard of glucose? That's what plants make. It's got 6 carbons in it, so they need 6 carbon dioxide molecules. Then along comes an animal and eats the plant. Number 2. So number 2, primary consumers. So you now have primary consumers, herbivores eating plants. Then number 3, it is a second or third level. They call it a higher level consumer. Second or third level consumer eats up the food chain. So you're just moving the carbon that was in the plant, now it's in all of the animals and it moves up the food chain. Not everything you eat goes into your muscles and your tissues. So it's in the feces, it's in the waste, goes back into the soil. So that's what these lines are for. When animals die and when they are giving off waste, number 4, waste and death, we'll put it into the soil, and that decaying matter is called detritus. So that word right there in that box is detritus. It's dead and decaying matter. So number 4 was dead and decaying matter and waste are going to get decomposed by the soil microbes. That's bacteria and fungus. And when they decompose it, it goes back into the atmosphere. And that's the carbon cycle. Another main ingredient in living things is nitrogen and phosphorus. So the next 2 pages in the textbook have phosphorus and nitrogen. So fill in these diagrams, and these pictures, I will tell you, are on the test. So make sure that you can explain it to another person. And here you're explaining it to yourself by writing it in. So if you need to, print up a blank reading guide and fill it in as best you can and practice it. If you show up to Friday's football game today and you haven't practiced your drill, and if you're on offense and they're going to call your play and you don't know what to do, that's like coming into the quiz on next week and you haven't practiced it. You break the huddle. All right, here's your password for the quiz. Go. Like, am I on offense or am I on defense? So academics is like a sport. You have to train for it, and sometimes we do a good job, sometimes we wing it. You have a question?
Yeah. My textbook won't come up because it says my account's not active.
All right, let's work on that. I'm going to have you do the rest on your own. We covered most of it. These are due Monday night. And now I want to show you that there is a study guide. The study guide, it's not homework. It's just a guide for you. So I have it under modules. And if you haven't already done so, you can minimize chapter 1 because otherwise it takes up so much space for you in the module, and just expand the ecology module, and it's right here under class notes, study plan for the ecology quiz. Every quiz is 25 questions, and so it's going to pull questions out of chapter 34 and 37. So how can you prepare? Do it in this order. Know your reading guides really well. Not just that you have an answer down on the page, but that you could print out a blank one and fill it in without looking at it. If you don't want to go through the hassle of writing it down, then grab another person and ask each other the questions and verbally answer each other's questions. Know the key terms. And then there are practice test questions for both chapter 34 and 37. I also gave you Kahoots on these, but really, do these in the correct order. Don't just do number 4. It has the lowest payout. If all you're going to do is study for 10 minutes, the reading guides are your way to go. If you're going to study for half an hour, then open up the textbook and review the key terms and so on. So let me show you some of the tools in the textbook. Over at My Lab and Mastering, if you click on More, it has a study area. This is the website. I'm going to show you the Pearson app here in a minute. So here are the practice tests if you want to go through some practice questions. They're organized by chapter. And you can select 2 of these and build one test, or you can do one at a time. So here's chapter 34. So you click on it. You can get a hint if you'd like. So I recommend that you do those practice questions. If you want a cumulative test, then you can select a couple chapters at once. So you could say, I want to do questions from 34 and 37, and then you can build a quiz just off of that. The vocabulary study tools are right here. A vocab self-quiz. It will have flashcards pull up for you, so you can see that. And I really like the app because it's got a match game for questions, so I'm going to show you that too. So I'll get mine ready. So here is the Pearson Plus app for your iPad and your phone. And right here are flashcards, right inside the textbook on the left-hand menu. And you can create a deck off of all the cards. As you go through these, you might go, you know what, I don't really know what aphotic zone is. All right. You just kind of scan it. Intertidal zone, not sure about that. Pelagic realm. Okay, and then you can create a deck just on your start. Favorite items. What I like is the match game. If you click match game, all terms, it's going to give you a match. So the northern coniferous forest is the taiga. So why did it not give me something that would match those two? They weren't matches. All right, maybe it glitched the first time. Oh, okay. I didn't see that I could scan up and down. So it's got 6. I thought it was just 2. So transpiration is the loss of water, temperate rainforest, photic zone, where light could go through, coniferous forest. When you get it all right, it gives you more. So kind of another way of practicing that. So I'm going to let you have the rest of the class period to work on the reading guide. You can check out the study guide. The Succession Virtual Lab is due Sunday. The Ecosystem Reading Guide is due Monday. And your test is Tuesday. Yeah, sure. And then we can look at your textbook. So you have about 20 minutes.
This one? Yeah.
Work on something for the class.
I don't know. It's like basically
Oh yeah, newsletter, yeah.
basic organism being in there. Did you?
Basic organism and the ecosystem.
Oh, I'd say